Jessie Amaolo is the Services Specialist and Curator of the Toronto Public Library's Arthur Conan Doyle collection. Her role is to aid in building and maintaining one of the world's foremost collections of library materials devoted to the life and work of Arthur Conan Doyle and his most famous literary creation, Sherlock Holmes. Welcome to the Bibliophile.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So why should the literary tourist visit the Toronto Public Library and this collection?
To start off, I'd say because we are one of the top collections of its kind in the world. We fall among the top 3 research collections for Arthur Conan Doyle materials.
There's a couple. There's one in Minneapolis, right?
One in Minneapolis and one in Portsmouth, England. And us. So for researchers, it's a great resource.
Okay, so what have you got here that's so good?
So we have one-of-a-kind materials, manuscripts, and first editions. We have imitations of the stories. We have multilingual materials. We have collectibles. We have posters, film stills, you name it. We collect it if it's related to Sherlock Holmes or Arthur Conan Doyle.
Okay,
Yes.
So it's an ongoing effort then, but these things are never over, right?
No.
Yeah.
We continue to collect and we'll continue to collect. So.
Okay, so what manuscripts do you have?
Different types of manuscripts. So one example would be letters, business letters or personal letters. We also have some short stories he's written. He wrote a series with a character, Brigadier Gerard. So we have The Marriage of Brigadier Gerard. We have that manuscript. We have plays. So we have a play called Angels of Darkness, which uses many of the same characters found in the first Sherlock Holmes story, including Watson, but no Holmes. But written around the same time.
So Watson's more important than Holmes?
I guess so. No.
And what does his handwriting look like?
Well, I can show you an example.
Yeah, let's have a look.
Okay. So this is Angels of Darkness, which I mentioned earlier.
I'll take some photographs of that.
Sure. So it's very pristine.
Oh, look at that. That's one of his notebooks, is it?
Yeah.
Isn't that nice?
Yeah.
It's kind of a marbled exterior.
Signed Arthur Conan Doyle. And actually, you'll notice in many of his writings, he doesn't make many edits.
No, it's very, it's almost like calligraphy, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Wow.
Yeah.
Well, that makes me think this might have been transcribed from something else.
Possible.
But still, it's in his own hand, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
No, there's some little corrections, eh?
Yeah.
So, was this part of the original collection, or did you acquire this later on?
Most of the manuscript material has come to us over time through purchases and donations. But I can kind of tell you a little bit about how we started.
Yeah, let's do that. Who's the wonderful collector?
The collection started about 50 years ago.
Okay.
And from what I understand, it began at the Central Library, which came before the Reference Library.
Okay.
And
so in other words, he donated it there?
It was a purchase made, actually. The foundation of the collection was a purchase that was made from a rare book dealer.
Oh, so it was the decision of a librarian to start this?
Yes, it was. So
okay.
At the Central Library, they had just decided that they were going to cut their circulation and make it a strictly reference library. So they were looking to increase their reference holdings. And so came along a special collection. And the story is that there was a librarian by the name of Cameron Hollier working in the Languages and Literature department. And he heard about a sale by a well-known Canadian book vendor, Rare Books.
Who's that, do you remember?
His name was Hugh Ensign Courtwright.
Oh, he's still around.
Yeah. So from what I've read in Cameron's notes,
Is Cameron still around?
No, he passed away.
Okay.
Yeah, he was with the collection many years.
Mm-hmm.
And we have a memorial lecture that's put on every year in his name.
Is that about Sherlock Holmes or not?
It's
Primarily
related to, yes, or
Okay.
Arthur Conan Doyle, yes. And it's put on by the Friends of the Arthur Conan Doyle collection. So yeah, he got wind of this sale. From what I understand, it was about 500 books for $1,000, most of which were early Arthur Conan Doyle, Sherlock Holmes, detective fiction books.
So the book dealer, he must have got them from a collector then.
He did. And
Do you know who that collector
was Vincent Baillie.
Okay.
Yes, so he was a collector, and it was his estate from what I understand, and just that was the foundation of the collection. And then over time, some other private collections came our way through purchase and donation.
Yeah, I guess the word was out that you guys were looking for Sherlock Holmes and Conan Doyle.
Yes.
Okay.
And then in recent years, we received the Friends of the Arthur Conan Doyle collection, and they are a group of volunteers who help us to raise funds and promote the collection. So they help us to acquire materials that are sometimes beyond our budget.
So they already had a collection?
No, they had an interest in the collection.
Oh, okay.
So,
okay.
Yeah.
Do you remember what was in that original set of books that was donated? Did you say it was early stuff?
Yes. I don't remember specifically, but from what I know, because they were establishing a special collection, they had asked that the cataloging department kind of set these books aside, label them properly for this new collection. And they came back all stamped and stickered and all of that, and that was a learning experience early on that should not happen for special collections items.
But it happened all over the place.
Yeah.
Now they wouldn't dream of it.
No.
It's defacing them, really, is what it is.
Yes, exactly. So that's kind of a way to identify some of the earlier, the ones that started the collection. So.
The ones that have been desecrated were the first ones. Okay. Okay, so your job then has been to, take a look at the gaps and try and fill them?
Pretty much, yeah. And as mentioned, there's always new materials being published, whether they be imitations, known as pastiches, of the stories, those are fictional, or research materials that people are writing. I always go back and look for rare materials that we might not have.
Yeah, I noticed they originally appeared in the Strand Magazine, which is more like a little kind of a paperback, isn't it? Yeah, with a sort of a perfect bound, spine.
Yeah.
His first stories appeared in the Strand, right?
Yes, with the exception of the first one, which was A Study in Scarlet, and it appeared in this periodical known as Beaton's Christmas Annual from 1887. From what I understand, Arthur Conan Doyle was kind of shopping around for anyone who would take his story, because he hadn't really established himself as a writer. He was a physician before he was a writer. So he had this new character, Sherlock Holmes.
Beaton is interesting. Yeah. His wife did the famous cookbook, right? Yeah, he was a publisher. Isn't that lovely? So that's it.
Yeah, A Study in Scarlet and Beaton's Christmas Annual. So this is a very rare periodical that we have here.
Yeah.
And it sees the first meeting of Sherlock Holmes and Watson and the first story.
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
And that was, again, in 1887?
87, yes.
Okay, and so was that like a huge hit right off the bat, or?
I don't think it was. I think he was commissioned to write the second story.
By
an American publisher. I think it was for McClure's Magazine.
Okay.
And that was The Sign of Four. And I think originally after this story, he thought maybe that was it, and then he was commissioned to write the second one, and then I believe it got going from there.
Oh, so he
gained popularity.
Yeah, he was popular early in the States then. So then the Strand, they approached him, I guess?
Yeah, the Strand, not exactly sure how that relationship started, but yeah, they picked up the rest of his stories and continued publishing.
For quite a few years too, right?
Yeah, I know Arthur Conan Doyle took a break just before The Hound of the Baskervilles for a while. He decided he probably wasn't going to keep writing the Sherlock Holmes stories, but I know that the Strand kind of played a role in getting him back to writing the stories, and he wrote many more after that. So
when did they go from the Strand? Like what dates were those?
This earliest story was 1887.
Mm-hmm.
So it was very shortly after that it was published in the Strand. So here I have 1891 as our first.
Yeah, that's the bound version of.
Copy here, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, with a lot of interesting
January
looking.
1891.
Okay. Lots of interesting etchings or black and white, of course.
Yeah.
So 1891, but they went for what, 10 or 15 years, no?
I don't recall when the last one was published.
Okay.
The last Sherlock Holmes story. But there were 60 Sherlock Holmes stories written.
And they came out monthly?
They came out monthly, but they came out in sections, so you wouldn't necessarily get the whole story.
Oh, right, okay.
You might get a portion of the short story, which would keep you purchasing the subsequent
That's
issues.
right, like Dickens, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And perhaps you can tell me a little bit about Arthur Conan Doyle then.
He was actually born in Scotland, but he moved to Britain and became a physician. Okay. So he started out with his own practice and couldn't quite get things going. And he found that he had a love of writing, so he would write on the side. Eventually it took over, and he wrote on numerous topics throughout his life. He wrote the fictional stories, which we've seen here, but he also wrote a great deal on war, travel, history, crime, religion. So he had basically an opinion about everything.
So who published him first? Beyond the actual magazines, what's the first book?
That's a good question. One publisher which published a lot of his early works was George Newnes of London.
Oh, and in fact, they published the Strand Magazine, I think. So, well, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, and that's 1902. Okay. So I guess it experienced success in the magazine, and they decided to put it into book format.
Definitely for sales, and many of the other stories are kind of bound together.
Right.
And then there were 4 novels too. So
4 novels.
And 56 short stories.
And The Hound of the Baskervilles is the most famous novel.
I would say so, yeah.
Okay.
Most people identify it as their favorite.
So, what about the character himself? Can you tell me a bit about him?
Sherlock Holmes, yes. Well, he's a consulting detective, and he lives in Victorian England, and he's got his roommate sidekick Watson, who acts as as narrator throughout the stories, and people kind of draw on him as a last resort when they can't seem to solve a crime for themselves. They consult him.
Right. So the police go to him, or no?
Police go to him, and other private detectives go to him for help with that. Yeah. Because
he's known as a brilliant, logical mind? Okay.
Yes.
And he's a bachelor?
He is, yes.
And so is Dr. Watson as well? They're 2 bachelors?
2 bachelors at the beginning, but Dr. Watson does get married.
In a story devoted to that or not? Or it's just kind of a side plot? Not sure. Okay, that's fine. Anything else about either of these characters?
I don't know. Holmes just has a brilliant mind, and he focuses a lot on observation and deduction in his reasoning, and always seems to
get his man.
Yeah, pretty much, yeah.
Okay. Okay. So, when did it hit the stage then? Do you have an idea of that?
I don't have an exact date, no. William Gillette was one of the early portrayals of Sherlock Holmes on stage, and he played into a lot of the iconic dress that we see with Sherlock Holmes. That wasn't described in the stories, so...
Don't wonder whose idea that was. Maybe Gillette?
Yes, I think he definitely played a role in it.
Was Conan Doyle around when they staged it, or had he died at that point?
No, he was around at that, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Was he consulted?
He was, yes. Yes.
Okay. I guess they paid him, so he can do what you want.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the famous films with Basil Rathbone and Nigel Bruce.
Mm-hmm.
When was that? Was that in the 30s or 40s?
I don't have all my dates down, I must admit. But, yeah, he was one of the most famous portrayals of Sherlock Holmes. I remember watching some of those films growing up. And then, more recently we have Benedict Cumberbatch.
That's the TV series, right?
Yeah. And Robert Downey Jr. Yeah, there have been many portrayals over the years. And, yeah.
So what do you have in that regard? Do you have scripts or
we
stuff?
Do, yeah. We have scripts for some of the various films. We have the audiovisual components too.
So what does that mean?
The actual films. Some are even on reels.
So does that mean someone can come in here and, like, you've got DVDs of them all, or no?
We do have DVDs, many DVDs. They can be watched here.
Okay.
We have books about the adaptations, which will describe, the various actors and details of all the movies and shows and that sort of thing.
So what do we have at the Toronto? This is the reference library, right?
Yes, Toronto Public Library, Toronto Reference Library.
Yeah, which is kind of the corner, a little bit beyond the corner of Bloor and Yonge.
Yes.
So what have you got here that would be of interest to the literary tourist?
Yeah, so we have many things. So we obviously have different editions of Conan Doyle's works, the Sherlock Holmes stories, the fictional stories, as well as nonfiction. We have imitations of the stories, so we have what I mentioned earlier, pastiches, parodies, so those are more contemporary materials. We also have research materials, so there's a great deal of people out there who study and have a passion for Sherlock Holmes, so they write essays and do critical research on him, and so we have publications on that. We have journals written by, there's various societies all over the world who meet to discuss Sherlock Holmes, and they publish and they lecture, so we collect those periodicals.
I guess is there a worldwide Conan Doyle or Sherlock Holmes society?
There are societies all over the world. From what I understand, some of them are larger than others, and
are they all part of the same umbrella group, or?
They're all called scion societies.
What's that?
Scion societies, they're referred to, and they all are.
How do you spell that? S-C-I-O-N?
Yeah.
Okay.
And they're all. They all just meet to discuss and lecture and all of that. Okay. The Toronto-based group, they're called the Bootmakers of Toronto, the Sherlock Holmes Society of Canada. We run a co-sponsored program with them, and they meet here about 4 or 5 times a year. And they'll often discuss one of the stories and invite in a speaker who has some sort of knowledge of the story or some sort of tie-in, or they could be an imitation writer, something like that. And they published their own periodical called Canadian Holmes. So, yeah.
It's cute.
Yeah, yeah.
Speaking of architecture, you've got kind of a room that replicates the Baker Street.
Yeah, so the room itself is supposed to look like Sherlock Holmes's fictional study.
Okay.
From the Victorian era. So it's kind of got that warm feel to it.
Yeah, wooden floors.
Yeah. So it's quite inviting for anybody wandering in, wondering what's here, and deciding they want to stay and read a book.
So a visitor can come in there, and you told me that they can take any book off the shelf they want to and have a look at it?
Yes. So one of the interesting things about the collection is most special collections would kind of have some restricted access, but the interesting thing about this collection is that you can go in and browse at your own leisure, take books off the shelf, read them, stay as long as you'd like, just based on interest, you know. So it's quite neat for that reason.
Yeah. Well, it's a very nice looking facility you got here. It's kind of a circular room with circular desks and.
Yes, it's beautiful. It was revitalized in recent years thanks to a donation from the Marilyn and Charles Bailleys, which are Toronto philanthropists. But the Arthur Conan Doyle room itself, again, revitalized by Clifford Goldfarb and some of the friends of the Arthur Conan Doyle collection. He's the president of the group. So, yeah, as mentioned before, they help us to build the collection and get the word out.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now you got a big trolley of stuff here. Is there anything in particular that catches your eye? We've seen an early edition of the Hound of the Baskervilles, or is that a first edition? Do you know?
That was a first edition. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And we've seen the Beaton's Study in Scarlet. Anything else that stands out?
I think I mainly wanted to bring this out as an assortment of really what we have. So what I wanted to mention earlier is that we have something for everyone, basically. We have children's materials, we have graphic novels, we have comic books, we have the manuscripts, we have early editions, contemporary editions, imitations, we have multilingual, so we collect translations, we have writings on the writings, they're called. So we have essays on Sherlockian scholarship. We have annotations of the stories. We have biographies.
Do you have an idea of what the best biography is?
I like Teller of Tales. It was a good one.
And that's by
Daniel Stashauer.
Okay, why do you like that one?
I don't know, just covered everything, and it was just easy to follow along, and you really got a sense of Arthur Conan Doyle's life. Big recommendation is actually this more recent book, From Holmes to Sherlock, by Matthias Bostrom. So it basically talks about every facet of Sherlock Holmes and everyone who was involved in his creation. So it touches on not only the stories in Arthur Conan Doyle, but also the adaptations and the societies and people who would write about the stories and just every single aspect of his character. So that's a very interesting.
Like publishing history as well, do you think?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's a very interesting read. Also, Conan Doyle for the Defense is another one. So Arthur Conan Doyle tried his hand at being a detective in his life. So
in real life?
In real life, he got involved in a few cases, and from what I understand, people would often approach him asking for help in cases, but a few he did get invested in and managed to get some acquittals for his for the accused. So there's some interesting stories there. And then we do have some kind of more novelty items, interesting items. We have miniature books. So we have a complete run of the Sherlock Holmes stories here in miniature form. And we have posters and illustrations and games. We have collectibles such as statues.
Film? Do you have the film posters?
We have film posters, yeah.
And you go after this, do you?
I do, yes.
That must be fun.
It is fun.
So what? You just scour eBay and Abe Books and Biblio? And...
Abe Books is a big one. Also, I guess by a certain point when you've been purchasing for a collection for many years, you kind of establish relationships with vendors.
Mm-hmm.
So there are some that I often go to.
Like who?
I find there's some in England that I've been...
just because they specialize in...
Yeah. Adrian Harrington is one.
Yeah. Okay.
Tend to find a lot there.
We interviewed him years ago for the Bibliophile.
Yeah? Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
Neat, yeah. So there's different vendors. There's also, with the more contemporary materials, there's a local store called the Sleuth of Baker Street, and they specialize in mystery writing and a lot of Sherlock Holmes and Arthur Conan Doyle materials. So a few times a year I'll place an order with them for some of the newer content. Yeah, and then sometimes people bring things to my attention, whether it be members of the Friends of the Arthur Conan Doyle collection or the Bootmakers of Toronto, or even, the public. They can bring my attention to items to consider. Also, we accept donations, which is wonderful. So sometimes people come across items that they already have and reach out to us to see if it would be a good fit. So there's many ways, yeah. I'd say it's one of the funnest aspects of the job.
Collecting stuff is a lot of fun. Mm-hmm. Especially when you find really good stuff that doesn't cost that much. That's, just finally, what about the future? Do you have any big plans for the collection, or is this sort of more of the same, just slowly acquiring stuff, or?
More of the same, but also we would always love to acquire manuscripts, primary source material. I think a great research collection is built on a lot of that primary source material. So yeah, our dream is to just acquire more of that.
Okay, so if anyone out there is listening that has any that they want to get rid of,
please consider us.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah. Good. So just finally, whereabouts are you located again?
We're at Yonge and Bloor in Toronto. We're at the Toronto Reference Library. And we're in the Marilyn and Charles Baillie Special Collections Centre on the 5th floor of the library.
Very good. Well, thanks very much for taking the time to educate us about your collection. I've been speaking with Jessie Amaolo, who is she's a services specialist at the Arthur Conan Doyle Collections, Special Collections Department of the Toronto Public Library. Thanks again.
Okay.